Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, the weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who spent his childhood hoping his parents would finally reveal that he was adopted from Andromeda.
Tim Longo. Yes. Good one. All right. Yes, my parents do wish that, and I'll tell some stories about that later. So I am excited to introduce our guest, Mark Crowe, one of the two guys from Andromeda, and let me cover some of the backstory for Mark's career before we get into some questions. I'm extremely excited and honored that he's come on the podcast. Definitely an early, though Mark doesn't know this, an early sort of game development hero of mine. And so he actually started off, as far as I can tell, back around 1984, a little bit earlier. And I didn't know this until researching Mark, actually in the art department for the sort of manuals and marketing department for, I guess, Sierra. And then with his partner, the other guy from Andromeda, Scott Murphy, ended up pitching early concept of Space Quest 1 to Ken Williams, founder of Sierra. And Mark and Scott are some of the earliest members of the Sierra Online team. And then Mark actually went on to work on multiple franchises within Sierra Online, including Leisure Suit Larry, obviously all of the Space Quest games, I believe, Police Quest, and then later actually moved into the Dynamics division, which did sort of expanded beyond the adventure game genres and started doing a bunch of other things there, including the Space Siege. Was that the name of it there?
Star Siege.
Star Siege, sorry. My bad. Star Siege series. And actually, to go back, I wanted to also mention, I didn't realize that you guys had done the Black Cauldron, which was also a game that I really fondly remember from back in the past. So there were some licensed games in there. But Mark coming from the art side of things and Scott coming from the programming side of things. Some of my earliest memories of really game development personalities, if you will, if I can, use that term, and then broke off after leaving Dynamics to join up with some of his cohorts, starting off their own company, and then today he and Scott and Chris Pope are actually working on some new ventures, pun intended. Continuing their work on sort of the adventure game series with a science fiction spin, looking to be comedic in nature, which is exciting. And so I'm sure we'll hear about that from Mark later on. But Mark, thank you so much for coming on. Really excited to have you here and really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for inviting me on. This was a lot of fun.
Good. So, I think as we talked about in pre-show a little bit, one of the first things we wanted to ask about, because one of our focus for this series of games that we played with King's Quest and Space Quest was really to talk about Sierra a bit as a company, and its influence on obviously the industry, really from the 80s until now, and still an influence on many different games today. And so one of the exciting things about having you on is that for whatever you're able to, comfortable with, can remember, we'd love to talk about sort of what the early days of Sierra was like, both maybe with two different lenses. One kind of talk about your early career and kind of how you got started. The audience is always really interested to hear about those sorts of stories, especially back in that era, before Brett and I got into the industry. And then, not that, Brett he's older than I am, so he got in pretty early. No, just kidding. But anyway, but also then just kind of what was the company like back then when it was getting kicked off? Because it was such a interesting and unique company in that era and had a lot of great success. But so yeah, maybe talk a bit about your beginnings and then the company's beginnings.
Sure. Well, I could kind of share with you a little bit about what my first experiences at walking into the doors at Sierra were like, and my impressions, and
that would be amazing,
and that sort of thing. At the time, I was looking for work. I was I was an out of work artist. I had a portfolio of things that I had been doing for this label company down in the valley in Fresno, down in the valley from the Sierras, and my parents lived in North Fork, And my wife's parents lived in North Fork, and I always thought, man, that would be like my dream to be able to live in the mountains and work. And my mom sent me this, I was interviewing around, and my mom sent me this article from the local paper about this computer company. And I thought, well,
wow.
It's the first time I'd heard anything about personal computers or anything. I had no exposure to that at all. And so I had no idea what that was about. And I thought, well, maybe they need some artists. So I think, I can't remember if I called them and scheduled an appointment or just showed up at their doors with my portfolio. But I got in to talk to the art director there, Greg Steffen, and got to show him my portfolio and everything. And they happened to be looking for artists in that department that were doing the they called it paste up back in the day before they had computer aided design and all that stuff. But setting up camera ready art for the boxes and packet documentation and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I thought, wow, this would be great. Being able to work in the mountains and be able to do this. Anyway, they liked my portfolio, and they pretty much offered me a job on the spot to come to work there. And I was working there the following week. And during that time, the early days there, it was kind of very exciting because I was exposed to the whole Apple II personal computer experience and all that. And they allowed me to take computers home, and that resulted in me staying many sleepless nights playing Wizard and the Princess and soft porn. Those early Mission Asteroid and all those early games that just really captured my imagination, and my head was just kind of exploding with possibilities. And so that was a very exciting time. The Frogger arcade game was coming off their assembly line at that time. So seeing that,
right,
the whole production end of that, how they put that product together and kicked it out the door, that was pretty amazing.
Oh, at that company, you're saying? Or
yeah, that was at the company. This was all taking place in this little strip mall office space that they had kind of taken over. They're in the little town of Oakhurst,
right? And
so, that was crazy. Crazy.
I guess
times.
I never realized that they had done arcade games as well.
That's interesting. Frogger was one that they had gotten a lock on. I think. What was that for? Was that for the Sega?
Oh, I forget who owns Frogger originally. But so they were essentially kind of porting it to the U.S. or something like that.
Right.
I see.
And I believe that was. Well, shortly after, my time frame might be messed up, but I remember that was, I think Ultima came along much later than that, but maybe a year or two down the road from that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so I lost my train of thought. It was just all kind of a new world that opened up to me when I walked through those doors, and it was just an awesome place to work, very laid back.
Yeah.
A lot of the stories you probably heard about the hippiness of the whole environment. That's very true.
Yeah, that was something that I had kind of vaguely heard from time to time. But it sounds like, I definitely, as a kid at that time, definitely romanticized what I thought Sierra was like, and I had a kind of a similar thing where it's like, well, I didn't know exactly where Oakhurst was, but with the logo being Half Dome and everything, and this concept of this, because I was in Northern California near Lake Tahoe as a kid, and so it wasn't that far away in my head.
Right.
And so this concept there's this concept that the Sierra games that I was playing and loved was not that far away, was just mind-boggling to me. That and then seeing your guys's famous picture with the two of you with your snouts on, pointing at Half Dome or El Capitan, I forget which one it was, and just that was ingrained in my head. And like I said earlier, it for whatever cool, weird reason, it made an impact on me that there's these personalities that are having fun doing this, and I guess it stuck with me because it's what I ended up doing myself. But I had heard. A lot, though. I get that a lot from people that played our games and were inspired to, become part of this awesome industry. Yeah, that's great. And so before you stepped through the door, were you not a computer guy at all then? Was it
Not
you were
at
just
all. I had no
Oh,
exposure
interesting.
to it whatsoever.
How
And
funny.
occasionally I'd go into an arcade and plunk a few quarters and
Yeah.
play some arcade games, but that was the extent of my gaming life.
And how do you remember how roughly how big the company was at that point when you joined up?
Oh, employee number wise,
Yeah.
I want to say maybe 15, 20 people.
Yeah. Wow. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, even I would think even by those days standards, that's even high. That's awesome. Yeah, it just was Sierra was one of those companies that felt like they had their act together, and when it comes to franchise development and just kind of keeping series going, and improving upon those. So we'll definitely want to get into that as we go. But so what was?
Well, I wanted to actually take a quick sidebar and ask when did you get to know Scott Murphy? Did you know him before you went there? And for our audience who may not be as old as Tim, who are the two guys from Andromeda? Can you give a little sense of that as well?
Well, I'm trying to remember the first time I met Scott. He worked there. I think he went to work there either just prior to me or after me, but he was working in the support department. Mm-hmm. and or QA and maybe both. And we didn't cross paths too much, being in different departments. But it was when he had a desire to learn how to program, and so he went on that path. And I definitely wanted to get into the game graphics part of it, as that was just kind of like an emerging. They were just getting started with that. And so
Absolutely.
I definitely wanted to get my fingers involved in that.
Right.
I did some box illustration and stuff for them, and I kind of self-taught as far as an illustrator goes. And that was kind of fun for me because we had these, we were paying outrageous amounts of money for these illustrators to do these box illustrations. And there's some really beautiful stuff that would come in our doors and, be in our art files, and I'd be able to look at that and just drool and kind of study how it was done, and kind of taught myself a lot of art techniques just by studying these pieces of art that came in. And so that was exciting.
And then I had read that you and Scott had done a sort of early pitch or prototype for sort of a small number of rooms concept for Space Quest for Ken. Do you remember any of that, or can you kind of walk us through a little bit of like?
That's definitely fast forwarding quite a bit from that point when I started.
Oh, okay.
But,
yeah.
Sure. So yeah, we were working on the Black Cauldron project together, and Scott was programming. I was art director on that, and that's when we started talking to each other. It was the first time we'd worked together, and so we were shooting the crap and talking about our love for science fiction, and the talk became, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we could come up with an idea for a science fiction adventure game?" And so it was just from that we started throwing around ideas, and he kind of developed a core idea, a storyline idea, and approached Ken with the concept of us, doing a game and or at least pitching a design. He said, "Yeah, sure. Why don't you guys put together a couple of scenes together and show us, that you can do that?" And so we did. And
that's so cool.
The first scene we put together was the corridor scene where there was an elevator connecting the two, and we thought we were being real innovative there by showing how characters could transport.
That was the first thing I was going to ask, was how much of that was in that.
We were just going to. Yeah.
That was literally the next thing I was going to ask, because that was something we really picked up on as literally an innovation at the time of using the space in an individual screen kind of more efficiently to get kind of more adventuring out of it.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So it's great. It's great to hear that was from literally the initial design before you even really had a story.
So, yeah, because we had played King's Quest right beforehand, we could really compare the two quite easily. You know what I mean, and talk about it more deeply in the sort of layout design. So that's extrapolate on that if you don't mind, or continue talking about that pitch.
Well, yeah. So I mean, everybody in the studio that we showed that to thought that was really cool, and that certainly emboldened us and encouraged us. And Ken really liked the idea, so he said, yeah, sure. Why don't you guys come up with a game design and flesh it out a little bit more? And that's what we did. And just kind of went from there.
That's great. And so when do you remember kind of timing wise when you'd pitched that? Had King's Quest already been out, or was it afterwards, or was there any, I guess with Black Cauldron, maybe there was a bit of a formula that Sierra was already
King's Quest
forming.
had definitely been out a while. In fact, I could be fuzzy on the time frame, but I believe that just prior to that, I had finished up some work. Prior to starting on Black Cauldron, I had helped finish up some animation stuff for King's Quest 2, is what they had been working on. Yeah, I just wasn't sure how early the pitch was compared to when, because King's Quest was 84, I think, and then Space Quest was 86. So I wasn't sure if maybe the pitch was earlier, much earlier on. But if it was, so there was already a bit of a Sierra kind of, like I said, formula or brand forming, and that's why I think we were so kind of delighted and surprised to see the sort of structure change, some of the structure change with Space Quest, because it was also much more of a, what we were calling in our previous episodes, kind of a little more linear in a way, there's sort of chapters and you leave locations and kind of don't go back to locations and stuff like that. But we can get into that as we go. Sure. So it was just you and Scott just kind of met working on some other games. And then how did the two guys from Andromeda get formed? Was that just another kind of organic kind of thing, or? Well, yeah, more or less. I mean, we were getting to the tail end of the development on Space Quest, and they were wondering, well, what do you want your picture on the box or what? And we were like,
that's great.
I don't know if I like that idea. We were kind of uncomfortable with the idea of, we don't know if this game's going to bomb. Maybe we don't want our names on it.
That's so funny.
We toyed around with the idea of kind of like staying in character, like a character in our game, and we come up with the idea of these two guys. Well, the name Two Guys from Andromeda was kind of a take on at the time there was a pizza chain called Two Guys from Chicago, or Two Guys Pizza or something like that. It's kind of like a big chain back east, I think. And
how funny.
Or Two Guys from Italy or something like that. I can't remember. And we thought, well, let's be Two Guys from Andromeda. And we'll wear some crazy get-ups. And I don't know what those are going to be, but, that's what we'll do for our picture. And so I believe this was all occurring around pretty close around to Halloween time. And I remember being in town, and I went into a Halloween shop looking for ideas for how can we throw together some alien costumes. And so I pulled some Spock ears off the shelf and these, I actually ended up making the pig noses because we couldn't find any good pig noses. And at the time I was dabbling in prosthetics, for film, horror films and that sort of thing. And so I sculpted these noses and made molds and put those together. And, but yeah, I was like, okay, well, let's just drive up the highway here. We took a friend with a camera up to Yosemite, and we'll take our pictures wearing like we're on vacation from Mars or something. It's Hawaiian shirts and shorts, and we wanted to definitely get the half dome in the shot. And so, fortunately, we had Yosemite in our backyard, so we just drove up there and snapped a couple of pictures. And it's funny because I was just digging through some old files of mine, and I dug up. I have the original 35 millimeter slide that was taken of us up there.
Are you
serious? Going to come across that?
Oh my God, that's a relic. That's a video game relic. You keep it forever. That's great. Donate it to the Smithsonian. I don't know. I'm just giddy right now that I didn't even anticipate talking about that picture, but I think I'm just giddy that you're describing the process of it. And even the motivation for, not being sure you wanted your photos on the box. So let's disguise ourselves, but then in character, I don't know.
It just sounds like fun to us to just kind of keep it all in character and be these alter egos. And
I love it. Well, it's just it's kind of an organic genesis of those personas that, I don't know if this is fair to say, but I feel like it kind of at that point ran away from you guys because it became such a thing, and and your personas, turned into that and or known as that. And I don't know, I think I'll definitely admit that I'm geeking out a little bit, and maybe it's a personal thing because that particular photo just was ingrained in my head. So thank you for telling that story. That's awesome. But
sure.
yeah, so after the pitch, can you kind of start running us through? I think one of the things that we as we talked about earlier, we're really fascinated by was the sort of structure of the game and kind of some of the differences with the formula that King's Quest 1 and 2 and some of the other Sierra stuff was starting to formulate. But what were those early days of developing that concept from that those few rooms into the full game? Like what was that like for you guys? And I'm actually also interested in, if anything that you're comfortable with, kind of talking about the Sierra game development process, whether there was one. It sounds like it was pretty
No, we were kind of inventing it as we went along, really.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Roberta had her methodology probably down pat, but we were just kind of finding our way.
Yeah.
We'd certainly ping her for advice here and there. And, yeah, it was just kind of a learn as you go process. And I mean, there was no book on this. Couldn't go to Amazon.com and get a book on how to write adventure games. And
right.
So.
And did you guys essentially, I would assume they're sort of mapping out room by room. Once you had those first 4 rooms for the concept that you gave to Ken, I assume it's just kind of mapping each of the rooms out from there and kind of just starting to just jump in and brainstorm the puzzles.
It's just like writing a movie or anything else. You come up with your story basically, and where the character's going, who he's going to encounter along the way, and then you fill in with puzzles as much as you can to keep the player.
So you were sort of story first. I mean, one of the things we were marked upon between the two is that the King's Quest 1 feels more like the collection of fairy tales, right, where the puzzles kind of come from, whereas Space Quest definitely feels like it's a full story with a beginning, middle, and end that needs to be done basically in particular order. I mean, as Tim pointed out earlier, it's a little bit more linear. So did you kind of dive in and develop story first? It sounds like that's kind of where you.
Well, I mean, you're doing all at once, really. It's like you can't just have it just can't be story. You got to what does the player do to propel the story along as he's going and as he's solving puzzles and discovering things. And so, I mean, it's just kind of a balancing act because you're trying to make an exploration game, but at the same time you're trying to tell a story or weave a story into that. So you're trying to do 2 things at once, and it's a real challenge.
Yeah, at least 2 things at once. I mean, was it comic from the get-go?
I think so. Yeah, we both love to laugh and get a laugh out of what we're doing, and I think we thought player would enjoy that too as they're playing the game, to get a chuckle once in a while. That's pretty entertaining. And so that was really one of our goals when we set out is to incorporate humor. How do we make dying in a game fun or funny, hopefully.
Yeah.
And not too annoying, but that's good or bad. That was one of our design criteria was to have interesting or humorous deaths.
It definitely takes the edge off of failure, to be able to laugh at it when it happens. And you have more animation in this game as well than in King's Quest, because there's a lot of different sorts of deaths, which is fun as well. So
I think I
appreciated it myself.
I'm sorry.
No, that
mainly comes from my background as an artist and animator, and my just desire to try to bring the screen alive as much as possible with animation and character movement and such.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that, and it's obviously we would love to have Scott on as well, but it's one question I wanted to have for you, being kind of on the art side, that we remarked during the series was, and again I don't remember King's Quest 2 as much, so maybe there was some of this in that one as well, but there wasn't in the original King's Quest. You guys actually seem to focus on different perspectives, sort of camera perspectives, more than King's Quest had, especially like the cockpit view in in the escape pod and things like that were really kind of, I don't know, Star Wars-esque, if you will, which was really refreshing for the genre at the time, I would say. It kind of really, not to expand upon this, but immersion was a little bit higher because of that, because you felt like you were Roger Wilco more specifically. Was that a goal, or did you guys kind of happen upon that, or?
I could say, that was a personal goal of mine, to try to make something as cinematic as. Yeah, I'm a frustrated film director or whatever creative person, and so this was my opportunity to try to use my mental whatever to create a cinematic experience, or as close as we could with the technology we had.
Yeah, cinematic was the word we used as well, and it was interesting that I think Brett was the first one to bring that up, because it was interesting. I had forgotten about some of that, and I think it was a surprise to both of us for Space Quest, because obviously you could really easily see some of the science fiction influences that you guys were using, and so you kind of want it to be cinematic because it's that sort of space opera, and you're kind of gallivanting around the galaxy from planet to planet and ship to ship and things like that. So I think it worked really well. And
yeah, I mean, it's also what your audience for science fiction kind of expects, right? Is Star Wars and Star Trek at the time, and so in order to connect with an audience, you've kind of got to reach for that stuff that they know. I mean, that's still something that we, in a way, struggle with even today. To maybe we draw too much from the same wells. But when you're starting out, that's definitely the thing to do, right? Is go for something familiar in a new context.
Yeah, it was definitely fun trying to cram as many sci-fi references in there as we could get away with. In some cases, not. But
going back to sort of the early concept of that split screen perspective, I wanted to delve into if you have any memory of some of the maybe intentional innovations or things that you guys, or maybe it's hindsight 2020, kind of you realized this was an innovation after the fact many years later or what have you, but what were some of the things that you guys were experimenting with compared to other things Sierra was doing? And I guess I would even say the industry, because LucasArts was kind of gaining on you guys around this time, and there was sort of, we talked a lot about that. We've played LucasArts games on the podcast as well, and had people on to talk about that, and in kind of two different, obviously two different directions for adventure games in this era. So can you kind of talk about like sort of what you guys from maybe a design perspective were thinking about on ways to expand the genre?
Well, I think, we were always, good. The programmers were probably cursing us, but the engineers, but we were always trying to push the technology as far as we could. Mm-hmm. Again, to, try to get more of a cinematic feel. Wherever possible. Like, I think we were the first ones to, we pushed for scrolling screens, side-scrolling screens. Mm-hmm. And
difficult to do at the time. So that's a real innovation.
Doggone, those guys, the engineers that were working on our system figured out how to do it, and I was just overjoyed when that happened. And it was just a lot of little things like that, technology jumps that I think we helped to help push. I wouldn't say we were solely responsible for them, but just I think we had the development or the engineer team on our side as far as wanting to keep pushing the technology and innovating wherever we could.
I'd once heard Roberta Williams speak about not really knowing too much about what was possible and intentionally staying ignorant of that, just to avoid falling into the pit of or the trap of only doing what you thought was possible, right? Mm. And if I think one of the great things about bringing more of an artistic eye into game making is you'll automatically ask. I'm a programmer by trade, and the number of times somebody has surprised me and said, "Hey, have you could we do something like this?" You almost always want to say yes as a programmer, like yes, oh yes, let's try that. As hard as it might be, because it might lead to somewhere new and interesting. So it's
you don't
cool.
Get that so much anymore these days. That's for sure. Yeah. And there's certainly something to be said for staying in the lanes and working with what you got. Definitely.
Yeah, the closer you get to ship, the more you want to do that.
Right.
So what about Roger Wilco? Is there any stories there for sort of his genesis and one of the early really recognizable characters for definitely adventure games, but I would say for the industry. Was that just sort of brainstorm stuff coming through, or was he inspired by anything? Or
No, well, he started off as this little helmeted pilot-looking dude, as little pixel dude, and tried to infuse him with as much character as you could with as few pixels as possible, and that was really, I kind of relished that challenge, actually, trying to do more with less.
yeah,
But as far as, we didn't know what to call the character, and we threw around some name ideas, and I think it was Scott and I used to sit in the office and read through. He had these. Are you familiar with the artist Clibben? I think is his name.
I don't think I am.
Clibben. He has these really bizarre art books that he come out with as sketchbooks, and they were just so thought provoking. And we always had those. Scott had those laying around, and I was looking at those, and there was one drawing in there of this geeky looking guy. It's just this. I wish I could throw it up on the screen and you could see it. But I looked at that and I just laughed. His name, all it said on it was Roger Wilco was his character's name. I thought, that's it. That's our character, Roger Wilco.
Nice.
And so we both agreed that that's what the character's name should be, and we kind of rolled with that.
And when did he become a janitor? Was it shortly after, or was he always a janitor?
I think he was always a janitor.
Okay.
We always kind of saw him as this underdog type character, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be funny if he was just he's this custodian on this ship, and that's kind of his genesis. Is he's this reluctant hero, and all he knows is mopping floors and taking cat naps in the janitor's closet.
Yeah, and whether it was intentional or not, one other observation we made about the character compared to, say, maybe Graham in King's Quest or what have you, is that Roger was closer to say the player when it comes to understanding what was going on character-wise, and so you were kind of discovering things as a player with Roger in a galaxy that you didn't know much about, and what the rules were and what things were called. And so it was kind of and we're obviously, for the podcast, we overanalyze everything. So whether this was intentional or not, but it really worked out nicely because of the vocabulary and the verbs that were in the game, you were discovering with him, so
Sure.
So the text descriptions you guys would write for his reactions to things would kind of not be far off for what the player might be reacting to in the same way. And so
Sure.
I thought that was was that a plan, or was that kind of just happy accident?
I think it was just our desire to be in the player's head. It's like, okay, what this guy's experiencing this for the first time, he wouldn't know what it is, and so it would seem odd that he would say, "Oh, that's a whatever," or he'd be pondering, "Well, what is this?" or "How do I use it?" or so it's kind of tricky how to provide clues without outright saying this is that's a whatever,
Yeah.
Right.
At least,
Yeah, it worked really well for that.
I say that now. Maybe I'm wishing that's what we were thinking, because certainly what we're trying to do now with our current game is not assume the player, or assume that the character is supposed to know what that item is.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, one other thing I was kind of curious about is it's a parser game, and of course, most of them were at the time. It wasn't too long after that you started shifting, I think, to point and click at Sierra, as well as at LucasArts, obviously, when they came along. How did people react to that? I'm kind of curious how, because players are notoriously resistant to change.
Right.
And I'm just kind of curious whether that was seen as a drawback or not at the time.
I don't recall there being a huge backlash. I seem to recall that people kind of took to it pretty well. Probably a lot better than Scott and I did.
Interesting.
Yeah, we weren't really in favor of that at all. We loved the parser system, and
added. Yes, please tell me more. That's exactly what I'm trying to get to.
that is sorely lacking now. And man, wouldn't it be great if games had that now?
So you were really behind the parser all the way.
Well, you know what? I say all the way, but when your boss says, "Well, this is what you're going to do,"
sure.
That's what.
Yeah.
We all.
No, but I mean, if you
adapt.
had your preference, you would have stuck with the parser.
And so, yeah, that was kind of definitely dictated to us that it wasn't going to be our call. We were politely asked about it, but then when we said, "No, we're going to go with the parser system this time," we were promptly told, "No, you're not." And so, probably a lot nicer terms than that, but nicer language. But I mean, they were nice about it. But definitely, Ken and Roberta were pushing for the graphical interface, and we could see that's just where things were going. So.
Well, and then what you kind of were you threw a sentence in there, a statement that I thought was interesting. I'd love for you to expand upon. When you said, wouldn't it be great if games today were still doing parser type stuff? Can you expand on that a little bit about what you mean? I think we can probably predict what you mean, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think in some ways, some games are doing that. Like, I haven't played it yet, but I've heard about this awesome texting game where you're like, you're talking to an astronaut who's stuck on some far-flung planet and trying to figure out
Lifeline. Yeah,
I haven't played that yet, but that sounds super exciting to me. I'd love to do a game like that.
Yeah, and is it just because of the sort of interactions that you get that way versus the point and click and graphical, where it's kind of the pieces are just kind of handed to you and you just put them together, but you're just kind of having to explore a little bit more using the parser. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're figuring out what to say, and that's a whole nother layer of gameplay that is it's interesting. It's like, okay, how do I say this in a way that this person understands or this game understands? That was part of the challenge or frustration. I'm not sure, maybe both.
Yeah, definitely both. I mean, I'm a parser guy myself. That's why I kind of got at it. Is that I started on text adventures on mainframes, so I'm totally familiar with that, and to a certain degree, I agree. I think that games are probably too expensive to support that anymore, but I do love them, and it was really fun to look back at that time. For that.
Yeah, it was. I do recall how much more labor intensive it was to do a parser based game, for sure. Trying to think of every possible way somebody could be trying to type in something and what the proper response should be to guide them towards the solution.
Right. And it gives you opportunity for jokes as well when you play against what people would normally expect of a parser, et cetera.
Like, what is it going to say if I type this in? There's certainly entertainment value in that. Yeah.
And there's certainly ways to do that in point and click, but I agree with you. Pour one out for the parser games. Yeah.
Another thread that we talked a lot about, because like I said, we had played LucasArts adventure game on the podcast as well. Sierra fully embraced the concept of basically failure and death states and things like that. You referenced it a little bit earlier as kind of the signature thing, and LucasArts was their adventure game design was a little more closed circuit, where there wasn't really the same kind of fail states. Can you talk about that subject a little bit, because it's definitely was something that Sierra clearly chose to embrace for many years, and the concept that you can forget something or miss something early on that you need later, and the concept of how to design around that and how that is or isn't punishing for the player and
Sure.
and those sorts of things.
Well, it's definitely punishing for the player, and it's I freely admit that's kind of poor game design. I mean, again, we were learning, we were making mistakes.
Oh yeah, sure.
And I knew how frustrating it could be to die in the games, and I think there was a sea change there where we were starting to see that maybe that's not as entertaining, or with the audience expanding to not your hardcore adventure gamers, but we were trying to where the games would have broader appeal. Maybe I'm just interjecting my own opinions here or my thoughts at the time, but I don't know that the company as a whole was trying to make the games frustrating and difficult, consciously.
Got it. It was just sort of, it was just there was cause and effect. I kind of
wince at the notion that it was like a signature
fair enough.
element in Sierra games when I'd probably rather it wasn't.
Fair enough. I that's probably unfair for me to describe it that way. I definitely agree.
No, it's perfectly fair if all the games kind of suffered from that, if you will.
Well, and I think,
suffer feels strong because, one of the things I actually appreciated was because the games, once you had figured out solutions, redoing them was actually not a slow process. It wasn't like you'd go back and it's like, oh, I have 20 hours of stuff that I've got to redo. So it actually wasn't necessarily terrible, and you could actually work in the King's Quest game, especially be kind of working independently on different parts of the game and figure them all out and kind of write yourself your whole script of like, here's how I'm going to solve the whole thing. So it didn't, for me, it didn't detract. And there was some humor in that as well that I particularly enjoyed on the Space Quest side. I don't think it's a signature negative. I think that's maybe stronger than Tim intended.
Sure.
Yeah, and I what I was about to say too is just video game the industry and the medium at that time, and I think the industry has struggled with it, basically the whole time the industry's existed. But just how do you deal with death in games and as a consequence, right? And that was the common consequence for any video game at that time. So I can totally see how that was logical, and not necessarily an intended signature, design, but a logical thing for even adventure games, even though it wasn't sort of an action-y kind of thing where the consequence from not being good at the game from a skill perspective would be death. Here was more of a logic, or puzzle situation. So,
sure.
But what I was really kind of more interested in is what you're kind of alluding to of like the conversations that were happening about the evolution of that. Is there anything you can remember or expand upon sort of like those conversations around the office of sort of like the realization about how it needed to evolve?
Well, no, I can't really recall any conversations that we had amongst like Scott or I or other designers, honestly.
But you remember a sea change, you kind of said, kind of like mentality for...
Well, I think that was speaking personally, and that, and this was probably much more time past what we're talking about now, where realizing that, like maybe when we were working on King's Quest V or something at Dynamics, we were thinking of ways that we could not make the gameplay as death-oriented or, player-friendly, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Were there the other sort of series of topics, and Brett probably...
I can't say that we sat around the campfire and go, we need to make our games easier.
Yeah. Well,
that did not occur.
I think for all of us, that tended. We talk about the difficulty challenge, especially because for Brett and I, it's been 22 years, and so we've kind of had those same conversations over time. It's like it's a slow burn, right? Of like how we deal with difficulty across, and as we start working on games that need to be more accessible, like you said, for broader audiences. So it's a constant. It's a constant conversation, to be honest.
Right, and you run the risk, of alienating your core fans who want the sort of level of challenge that they've been having, and they're going to miss that when it's gone. I mean, that's kind of one of the things I was getting at with the parser question, is that people are resistant to that change, and particularly as genres mature, people expect a certain thing, and sometimes you get pushed back on that, and sometimes you're trapped, even if you'd like to have a different direction to go.
Sure. And the other thing too is like on the feedback from players. It's not like today where you have the internet and you get instant feedback. You might get a letter or two. You might get a bad review or something in a magazine that comes out a month later, or you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So you didn't have that instant, what are people thinking of this, or how they like it,
Cool.
or how they're reacting to it. And
Yeah, that's a
more
whole
often
different.
than not, you're getting letters from people who really love the game, and they're just showering you with praise, and so you think, wow, that must be pretty good.
We're fine. Yeah. Did you guys do as a segue? What was your guys? Do you remember any playtesting processes that you guys did? I assume like everyone's playing in the offices are playing the game, and was there sort of like a any just were you giving each other feedback and trying to test it out on each other to see where people would get stuck and things like that?
Well, more often than not, it seemed like you were just trying to get the thing done and bug free.
Ah, yeah.
Get it out the door because you've been sitting on it so long. And sad to say, but certainly you're playing it every day, as a developer, and you're realizing, oh, this needs to be tweaked a little bit, or this is too difficult, or and then when you get more and more programmers on it, as the games got more complex and from a development standpoint, and you had bigger teams on it, that became harder and harder to manage.
Right. Well, and then kind of a segue from there, we talked about the puzzles themselves here and there, and kind of some of the fun, interesting ones, and some of the ones we got stuck on. How did you? Was that also kind of a just an organic process for you guys as far as how you thought of puzzles and tried them out on each other and developed them, and it sounds like you guys were just like most development teams focused on shipping, so that's admirable and understanding.
Towards the end of there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and everyone's chomping at the bit to get the thing out the door. And
but like what how did the puzzles come up for you guys, and what was the sort of development process for those? I think Brett, I remember Brett texting me when we were playing with the washing machine puzzle. And he couldn't. I tried to talk him off the ledge, but he had some frustration with that one. But like, how do these? How were they coming up for you guys? And what was that kind of back and forth process with the two of you, or how did it work?
Back and forth, sitting around in an office. Back it up a little bit. I'm trying to recall that time. It was kind of a dark time for Sierra, actually, because that was in the midst of their the cart debacle.
Oh no! What is?
And the company had just moved into this big, brand new. They call it the Redwood Building. There in Oakhurst, which is now it's a medical facility, but it was the biggest commercial building in Oakhurst, and we just moved in it. And had just, prior to moving in it, had a massive layoff. And so the hallways were empty. It was like a ghost town. And that's about the time we were wrapping up Black Cauldron. And when Ken gave us the green light to get working on the game, he basically gave us pick of our offices. Our office, I should say. And there was a whole section of the building, upper floor, with vacant offices, and that's where we holed up and basically spent our days shooting pencils at the ceiling, sticking pencils in the acoustic tiles in the ceiling, and brainstorming ideas, and just throwing ideas, and whatever stuck, we would develop that, and just brainstorming. Using each other as a soundboard for ideas, and running with what sounded funny to us. And I'm sitting there at the computer, and I was able to whip up graphics as we thought of them.
Wow!
And throw together prototype scenes and do animations or whatever. So it was just kind of a magical time as far as that goes, as far as being able to do whatever we want, have carte blanche over what we wanted to create.
And it was pretty much the two of you, just kind of there, kind of back and forth in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then did you eventually add more people?
We had to bring the other disciplines in, like the audio and the music and that sort of thing, sound effects.
Yeah. So you were able to really just on the fly, kind of as you guys were thinking of stuff, you were essentially prototyping stuff right away. That sounds really cool.
Oh yeah. That's good or
great.
bad.
Yeah,
a lot of the stuff was on the fly.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we obviously always strive for today, in everything we do, but it's just much harder to do
Oh,
for
yeah.
a lot of teams, you know.
Well, yeah, you're
Yeah,
you got
but
to adhere to
that's
a schedule and a development date or ship date, and
yeah, and just games,
got to hold
depending on the
a
game,
team
right?
of people depending on you to
Yeah, yeah.
show them what
Oh,
you want made.
that's awesome. Yeah. So, what are some of your, I have to just ask, like, what are some of your most memorable kind of moments in the game that you really are proud of, and you think back on, you know, um, obviously you said there's a lot of praise for the game, and it's really legendary in a lot of ways. But do you have any personal stories about things that you're really proud of and look back on fondly?
Oh,
Sorry to put you on the
yeah, it's hard
spot.
to pick any one thing or to think back that far, but um, at the time, this is just looking back, but I don't know if you've seen how our graphics were created back then, but the tools were, oh my gosh, they were they were torturous to say the least. I mean, it was a very laborious, torturous process to get a decent looking graphic on screen because it was all vector based, with the big blocky lines and color fills, and the tools were being developed as we were using them, so they were constantly crashing, and we were debugging them as we were trying to create art assets, and
I don't know. It sounds like pretty much like today.
yeah, could be,
Sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
even as crude as those are by today's standards, when I think I found a video somebody posted on YouTube that showed, because you could actually watch the graphics draw as they were,
Mhm.
just as they were created. And I was kind of amazed when I saw these videos on YouTube of that somebody somehow was able to record this. But watching those graphics draw on screen, like some of the scenes from Space Quest 3 and whatever, some of the backgrounds and everything, I really kind of was amazed looking back at that, at how we were able to achieve that with the tools set that we had. So I think I'm most proud of just being able to squeeze some decent looking colorful graphics out of those tools.
Yeah, that's. I
Yeah,
mean, that's the kind
it's
of.
always a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's something that one of the things that I enjoy about doing the podcast, because it's not our day job, is that we kind of get to pontificate about that sort of stuff where, it's not something that maybe players would necessarily think about all the time, but as developers, the things we're proud of often are not necessarily the output that the player sees.
Mm-hmm.
It's something behind the scenes maybe, or it's the way that we ended up being maybe tricking the engine into doing something that it wasn't meant to do, as much to Brett's chagrin. And those are fun things. That's kind of why I asked, because for our audience, I think some of, seems like they like to hear those sorts of anecdotes, because it's not something that you're going to get from playing the game always. But it sounds like somebody did the video, so we'll have to look for that and maybe share it with the
Yeah,
audience.
I'll look for it and see if I can put it in the show notes for sure. So keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
We're getting up on close on an hour here, and we like to give you an opportunity to tell us what you're up to lately. Whenever we have a guest on, we want to hear what they're up to. And I know that Space Quest fans should be excited for what you and Scott have been working on with others. The teams are growing, I believe. But you want to tell us a little bit about what you've been working on?
Everyone knows we've been working on a project called Space Venture, which is a spiritual successor to Space Quest, and in that it's very sci-fi parody, same kind of humor, and graphical user interface, 3D adventure game. I shouldn't say 3D, 2.5D is more accurate. And we did a Kickstarter some years ago, and here we are still working on the thing, but we're getting really close.
Yay!
Really close.
That's
and so
awesome.
we're excited for that. And if anybody wants to check us out, I need to put some plugs in here for our guys from Andromeda.com. They can read up on our the status of our project. And you can also check out our YouTube channel. YouTube.com, Andromeda.com, and you can see a lot of videos of the game in development, and that's always exciting to see and show. And I'm pretty proud of how it's looking.
That's great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll definitely put that in the show notes as well, so people can just kind of click through. Yeah, it's fun to see stuff in development, in particular when it's when it has the history that you folks have. It's really fun to see how you've grown and changed as well, and that's a fun part of doing the podcast for us as well. So cool. I definitely look forward to that.
And I want to also thank Chris Pope for this is one of your guys' partners, right? Working at the company. He hooked us up and made this possible. So thank you, Chris, for that. And I wish you guys the best. I'm as I said, I'm a big fan from back in the day, and I can't wait to see how Space Venture comes out. So appreciate that you guys are keeping it going.
All right. Well, thank you guys. This has been fun.
Awesome.
Always enjoyed talking to some old Space Quest fans.
Yay.
Well, for me, I'm a new Space Quest fan, so
I think we got a new one.
I'm late to the party on on Sierra games, but they are evergreen. It was a lot of fun to go back and look at them. So thanks so much for chatting with us tonight, Mark. Hey gang, Brett here. We hope you enjoyed this week's interview. Scheduling issues made it unclear whether it was going to happen, but both of us really enjoyed our conversation with Mark, and we thank him. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to some of what we talked about this week, including that Clyburn drawing of Roger Wilco and the time-lapse video Mark mentioned. You can find those either in your podcatcher or on the web at devgameclub.com. We'll be back next week to return to God of War, playing up through the 3 challenges in the maze. In the meantime, you can shoot us feedback at devgameclub@gmail.com, and of course we enjoy hearing your thoughts as reviews via Apple Podcasts. That really helps us reach new listeners. We'll be back to read those and answer your questions and feedback next week. Until then, good morning?